The bright side of addiction is recovery. This is a special edition of Recovery Coast to Coast as we celebrate the life, the career, and the recovery of five-time Major League Baseball All-Star Maury Wills. Maury passed away this week at the age of 89. Maury passed away with 33 years of continuous recovery. What was overlooked in most media accounts of his passing, lost among his baseball highlights, was the fact that Maury Wills died sober, in recovery for some 33 years. Back in, I believe it was our first year of doing Recovery Coast to Coast, about 17 years ago, Maury was one of the first big-time guests that we had. That time he was sober, I believe, 17 years. My co-host Brian Abker and I talked at length with Maury, and we will share that audio archive as we remember the life, the near death, and the long-term recovery of this Los Angeles Dodger legend. Now, if you're new to Recovery Coast to Coast, you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. And as I like to say, recovery is living proof, and Maury certainly embodied that. Here's a quick clip from this archived interview with Maury Wills.
In 1962, I was selected as the number one professional athlete in the world. I beat Arnold Palmer by one vote.
Wow.
I feel real good about that one. They don't even come close. They don't even come close to the success of getting clean and sober. I mean, not even in the same ballpark. My recovery has been the most. It's been the toughest thing for me to do, and it's been my greatest victory. And nothing comes, because without my sobriety, I mean, there is no Maury Wills.
Maury Wills, a baseball player who captured the entire world with his all-star play, and he inspired and influenced many, many people to find long-term recovery, because it took him a while. He went all the way down, nearly died, went through treatment numerous times until he finally found long-term recovery. I think you're going to enjoy this interview. Recovery Coast to Coast is supported by Sundown M Ranch, one of America's oldest, least expensive, and most successful treatment programs. Residential treatment at Sundown is important because it allows an individual to focus on treatment and healing and to learn new skills in a supportive community environment. It gives family members an opportunity to participate in their comprehensive family program. Very important. And they don't just treat and release. They follow people in recovery with their continuing care program. Their beautiful remote location at the entrance of the gorgeous Yakima River Canyon brings about a measure of peace and serenity. And yes, they do have an adolescent program which utilizes a multidisciplinary team of certified counselors and medical professionals who are fully committed to the highest quality of adolescent treatment at the most affordable price. They're well-trained, they're deeply caring, they are experienced professionals. Sundown's adolescent program is gender-specific. Each person supported by a team of professionals that includes mental, educational, psychological, recreation specialists. Living arrangements are also gender-specific, with separate wings for males and females. Patient rooms have a beautiful outside view, twin beds, full bath, shower. You can take a look-see at sundown.org/gallery. Remember, addiction is a disease that affects the whole family, and oftentimes the family members develop unhealthy ways to deal with the pain and the chaos of addiction. And unless these patterns are addressed, they can persist long after the alcohol and other drugs have left. That's why the family program is important. I'd like you to check out Sundown M Ranch, even if you're not looking for a treatment center right at the moment for someone, because at some point you may be looking for a treatment program. Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins. And now we go way back in the Recovery Coast to Coast archives to an expanded interview with a baseball legend, a guy who passed away this week. He died at the age of 89 He died with 33 years of long-term recovery. He is five-time LA Dodger All-Star Maury Wills. Here's that interview with my wonderful co-host, Brian Abker. We are pleased to welcome a five-time All-Star Maury Wills to the program. Welcome to Recovery Coast to Coast.
Good evening, Neil. Well, it's kind of late, isn't it?
It's a little bit late. Where are you calling from tonight, Maury?
I'm calling from Los Angeles.
You're down in Los Angeles.
I'm in the same time zone.
Yeah. All right. Well, we certainly welcome you to the program. I know you did a funk down in Texas not too long ago talking about your recovery. What is Maury Wills doing today?
What is Maury Wills doing today? Well, my vocation, I'm still in baseball. I'm back in baseball, I should say. I'm with the Dodgers. I'm with their base running, base stealing, bunting coach.
Wow.
I work with the Major League team. At one time, I was working with the entire organization. That includes the Major Leagues and the minor leagues. And I got to a certain point, and I mentioned to them I would only like to work with the Major Leaguers. So I put in 6 weeks in Florida, and then I work with the Dodgers doing their home games here at Dodger Stadium. I don't need to go on the road with them, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. So you just work in the home games?
Yeah, baseball is a young man's game, and you get to know it when you have to travel.
Yeah, I guess. I actually cover the Seattle Mariners for ESPN Radio and just do the home games, and 81 games is still a lot of games to cover, I got to tell you. My co-host tonight is Brian Abker. We're delighted to have you on the program, Maury. You've been in recovery, I think, coming up on 18 years now. Is that correct?
Actually, 17 years.
17 years.
It was 18 years in the paper in Fort Worth. Probably I told them 18. I got my math wrong, but it's all right. I got today, haven't I?
You've got today, and that's all. What it's all about
is I have right now. But I'll be 17 on August 13th.
August 13th. Maury, take us back to the beginning of your addiction, if you would.
Well, gosh, I don't know. First of all, I became powerless late in life. Mm-hmm. And when it did hit me, I didn't know what was going on with me. I became irritable and discontented, and so I found myself in conflict with people, places, things, with life. And I lost my adulthood dream, which was to manage in the big leagues. And you mentioned that I got an opportunity late to manage the Seattle Mariners, and the timing was bad for me because my behavior was beginning to change.
That was back in 1980 and 81
yes.
When you managed the M's.
That's right.
Were you in your addiction at that time, Maury?
No, I was well on the way, but I didn't know it. No, I was not in my addiction. I was not practicing my disease at that time. But when I did get fired from the Mariners, which was it hit me so hard that I got in my car and drove all the way back to Los Angeles, nonstop, locked myself up in my home for a long period of time. Before I knew it, I was addicted, and my body changed. Drinking, someone brought some drugs in, and all of a sudden I started using, and because it made me feel better, because the alcohol wasn't working anymore, and then that stopped working too, and so it all turned on me, and then I was hooked and didn't know what to do.
Maury Wills joining us, LA Dodger legend, five-time All-Star. My co-host tonight, Brian Abker. Brian?
Maury, it's a thrill to have you on the program. I grew up watching you, obviously, living in Seattle. Got to see you as a manager for the Mariners, and that drive that you took from Seattle to Los Angeles, that's a long drive. I've been on it. That gives a man a lot of time. What thoughts were going through your head as you were going down that drive, and how did that increase your addiction and the propensity to do that?
Well, first of all, Brian, I want to say I enjoyed the exchange between you and Neil before I came on the air here with you. They had opened the channel so I could hear you. It's obvious to me you both know what you're talking about when it comes to this addiction.
Thank you.
You bet. Driving, it's like I was embarrassed. You see, first of all, when I got that opportunity to manage in the Mariners, I was the only black manager in all of baseball, and there was a lot of hoopla about that.
And you were the third black manager in the history of the game. That's right?
Yes, and the only one at that time,
yeah.
Third in the game, and so and everyone was saying, boy, that Maury Wills, they got a manager now. he'll show him how to manage. And I've seen that guy play. I've heard him on NBC Sports when he was doing the game of the week and so forth and so on. And I got wrapped up in all this, and I went in there and I'm going to take the Mariners and make them a winner. And it didn't work. And I got in conflict with the writers too, and that's the last thing a major league manager wants to do. And so I got the press against me, and we played pretty well at times, but for the most part we didn't. And eventually the ball club let me know they had to make a change. And when they did, they even asked me if I wanted to come for the press conference, and I told them no. They offered me another job in the organization. I said no. The only thing I could think of was to get away. By that time, I was in self-pity and shame, and I was just embarrassed that I'd failed. I felt like such a failure. Let everybody down. This is my head talking to me now.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got in that car, it's just it's like I know I was headed for Los Angeles, but I was nowhere. I wasn't going anywhere, and I wasn't coming from anywhere. I was just driving. But I did make it there, and I just locked myself up in the house. The Dodgers found out about it and tried to help me. They declared an unlimited sum for my welfare, and they dispatched a man named Don Newcomb to get me out of the house and get me into a treatment center. But you had mentioned that earlier. That's not what I needed in my mind. So it was a long process before I realized that I needed to just surrender. But I was one of those alcoholics and drug addicts that lost everything. I was low bottom. I lost everything and used everybody up before I could turn it around.
Maury, how did a well-recognizable person such as yourself get the drugs?
Well, first of all, I started on drinking. I was just a pure alcoholic, and then alcohol took me to drugs. Drugs even took me into neighborhoods and areas around people with guns and things like that. I don't even want to talk about that on the air, but it was bad. It was brought to me as long as I had the money, but when my money ran out, then I had to go to the drugs, and just I found myself compromising my dignity and self-worth and everything just to get a fix. I mean, I went to a place that I don't want anybody ever to go to again, and if a drug or a drink ever sounds good to me, all I have to do is remember those days, and that'll help me to do what I need to do to keep from drinking or drugging.
A lot of folks in our audience certainly remember you. For the younger folks who may not, I mean, you can't have a conversation about baseball and Maury Wells without mentioning names like Ty Cobb and Willie Mays. I mean, you're really entrenched in the history of the game. What in your mind, and maybe you can give some insight, when you're famous like that and your addiction and disease comes out in public, what is that like?
Well, there's a term that we use, being a closet drinker. That was me. I stayed in the house. I wasn't out in the bars and places like that because I didn't want the neighbors to even know. Yet the grass was 1.5 feet high in the front yard. The blankets at the window. There was hardly ever any traffic going in and out of my home, and yet I'm thinking I'm being a secret. The entire neighborhood knew, and they all felt bad for me. That's the kind of things I went through, and eventually the Dodgers came and got me out of the house and got me to treatment. But that didn't work the first time. It didn't work the second time. It didn't work the third time. Maybe on the fourth time I got 30 days of not drinking, not using, but I wasn't sober. I thought I was because I didn't know any better, but I was just dry. And they took me to spring training, and they gave me money to clean up my wreckage, and when they did that, and that was the worst thing they could have done. They didn't know any better. I didn't know any better. But that money in my hands, I just went home and locked myself. Well, they gave it to me in spring training the last day as we were coming back to Los Angeles here with the Major League team. They said, Maury, just take care of yourself and just come out and teach our guys to play baseball the way you played, Maury, and take this money and pay your bills and do what you need to do to clean up your life a little bit. And when it's gone, we got more for you, and we'll just take care of you. I said, okay. And when that plane landed in Los Angeles, as soon as it hit the runway, skish those tires, all of a sudden that obsession that I know about today that I didn't know then hit me. All I could think of was getting loaded. And when all the players went in one direction in the terminal building to the chartered bus, I went the other way, got on the phone and called the liquor store and called the drug man and took a taxi home and locked myself in the house until all that money was gone. And I just couldn't help myself. And you're talking about despair and loneliness and fear. So the Dodgers said, well, he's a good guy who's gone bad, and they dropped me. And that was bad. And then I'm really out in the street now. And I wasn't a good guy who'd gone bad. I was a sick guy and needed to get well.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't know. For some reason, this was in the 80s, and in the 80s, I don't believe we were as sophisticated about this disease as we are today. Because people were trying to intellectualize me into getting sober. I heard you mention about Dimitri Young having the AA symbol.
The tattoo.
That'll help him if he goes to meetings and if he does the things he needs to do. But that in itself will not. Anyway, it was a long haul for me, and I did geographics. Went to other areas, thinking that if I get away from the distraction, get away from this area, and I went 50 miles south of Los Angeles to an area called Newport Beach, and I didn't know it at the time, but my disease is portable, and I take it everywhere. I take it with me, and I got there, and it was just as bad. I finally surrendered. And I'll always remember that night. I was lying on the couch about 4 in the morning. It seems like everything was 4 in the morning for me around that time. And this apartment that I had gotten, the Dodgers even helped me to move all my stuff there. It was thrashed. The lights were turned off. No water, no gas. Of course, no food in the house. No lights. Rent was paid, but the eviction notice was on the door. They just didn't want me there anymore. And all my so-called friends were gone, and I'm lying on a couch, about 40 pounds underweight, a little guy to start with, so I wasn't wearing much, skinny. And I remember, and I yelled out his name, God help me, I can't do this. Please help me. I don't know. I surrender. I said, I don't know how, and I don't know what it's all about, but I'm willing. And the moment I said I was willing, that's when I turned the corner. Willingness is so important. Without willingness on the part of the addict or the alcoholic, there's no chance. I finally became willing to listen. I took the cotton out of my ears, put it in my mouth, and got back up. Somebody found me on the couch down there and brought me back to Los Angeles, hand-fed me for about 4 days on a couch, and then I got up off that couch, and I walked into a meeting on August 13th, 1989, and I have not had to have a drink, nor drug, or any mind-altering substance since. And I'm an everyday guy. Even after this amount of time, I still go 7 days a week to my meetings. I have young men that I sponsor now, 5 of them. And my life is, I've gone full circle. My life is wonderful.
And the Dodgers have welcomed you back.
Dodgers love me now. They trust me over in a distant field with some of their prize players. They don't know what I'm talking about, but they trust me. Mm-hmm. And it's a good thing. The policemen who was where they were, what's the term we use? They were, they let me go when they caught me, so they were...
Enablers?
Enabling me, yes. Thank you. They were enabling me. They finally handcuffed me and threw me in the black and white face down when I complained that their cuffs were a little tight. They said, a little tight, huh? And they cinched it up even more. Well, now the police department, the sheriffs here in Los Angeles, they can't even have a banquet without having Maury Wills there. Mm. And so I'm solid in the community here. I go to schools and speak, and I got all my credibility back. I got my self-worth and self-respect, and life's wonderful.
And Maury, we got some emails that have come in. Jim in Chicago wants to know, what is Don Newcomb doing these days, and was he helpful in your ongoing recovery?
Don Newcomb chased me practically all over Los Angeles trying to 12-step me.
Did he really?
Oh, yes. He, when I was locked up in my home, in the very beginning, when the Dodgers were attempting to help me, Don Newcomb was there. He's under the house, trying to get through the windows. I think he was even trying to come down through the chimney. He was determined to help me. Today, Don and I, and in doing so, and I was so elusive, and I was so so in denial that it got to the point where he couldn't stand me. And now we're the best of friends. He even calls me for advice. We play golf all the time. Don is doing well, and for the caller, he's a great guy. I'm sure whoever called knows that about Don Newcomb.
Email from John T. in Butte, Montana. Do you work with young kids today, and do you talk with the young Dodgers about your story?
The young Dodgers know about my story. If any of the young Dodgers need any help, they're in denial, and they're keeping it to themselves. But they do test, so every now and then when there's somebody who they suspect might be using or drinking too much, they will call it to my attention and ask me if I will speak with them. So, and that's a good feeling. And we have a fellow by the name of Lou Johnson who actually he works in our the Dodgers alcohol and drug prevention and intervention program.
He's certainly helped a lot of people over the years, Maury.
Lou has helped me too.
Yeah.
So everything's, I don't know, life is just good right now. It's wonderful.
Frank in Phoenix wanted to know, what has been the highlight of your recovery in those 17 years?
The highlight, there was a time when I decided that, I really wanted to give it a chance, and then I looked at all the wreckage, and I said, do you mean they expect me to clean this up and pay back this money and all this stuff? I said, heck, I'll just leave the country before I do that. I'll just go to Mexico or somewhere and live. And it took me 14 years to clean up all my wreckage. 14 years.
Wow.
And I did it. And I remember the last payment of money I had to make. Don't even mention the government. And that was a good feeling that I did that. I was able to do it. And that's one, and the other is helping. In my home group, when I go to meetings, I'm one of the foundation stones there now. It's just to see all the people with a whole lot of time being clean and sober, saw me coming in, babbling, acting like a fool, but they never threw me away. They just said, keep coming back, Maury. Well, those people today even look upon me as being one of them now. That's the kind of stuff that makes my life so worthwhile. My family's back. I love my kids. I can show up for them when they need me. I'm responsible. When I say I learned through my sponsor, who's 89 years old, still calls me boy.
Oh, man.
Which is all right with me.
Yeah.
Because without him, I don't know where I shudder to think where I would be. Life's wonderful. That's the main thing. There's so many things I could go on and on and on.
My co-host, Brian Abker.
Maury, when it comes to your professional playing career, you have numbers and statistics that dreams are made of. Ball players growing up and playing now would die to be a 5-time All-Star, an All-Star Game MVP, NL MVP in '62, beating out Willie Mays. You led the National League in stolen bases for 6 consecutive seasons, and it goes on and on. How do those numbers compare to the number of 17 years of sobriety?
Well, it's one more too in there that not too many people get to mention, and I wouldn't expect you to know about it. It is in 1962. I was selected as the #1 professional athlete in the world. I beat Arnold Palmer by 1 vote.
Wow.
I feel real good about that one. That they don't even come close. They don't even come close to the success of getting clean and sober. I mean, not even in the same ballpark. My recovery has been the most. It's been the toughest thing for me to do, and it's been my greatest victory, and my, I guess, most appreciative accomplishment. And nothing comes because without my sobriety, I mean, there is no Maury Wells. I heard you mention about Steve Howe in the
What a tragedy.
Yes, and Steve and I were in treatment together for the Dodgers at sent us both. And at that particular time, neither one of us was ready to listen. Yeah.
You know, the reality is that so many people, Maury, don't make it, and the ones that do really are the miracles, and you are one of those miracles.
That's definitely a miracle, I know. For everyone that makes it, we know that tons don't. So yeah, I'm in a real good place today. You know, I'm a much better person today than I was before my disease surfaced, before I became powerless, and my body changed, and you know, about that, when that allergy sits in, you know, I couldn't have a drink without having to keep drinking. But before that, I was always a nice guy. You know, I was fan-friendly. I always signed autographs for people in the ballpark and after the game. I'll always, I don't know how much time we got, but I'm going to tell the story quickly. But
Sure, plenty of time.
We always played at night, but on Sundays we played in the daytime. And on Sundays, since we played in the daytime, we got to be outside of the park around 6, 7 o'clock. When it's summer, that's the nicest time of the day. So we would get dressed. So I'd have on a nice pair of slacks, white slacks, maybe a Dodger blue shirt, and nice shoes and everything. And after the ball game, I'm going to go to dinner somewhere. And I get outside, and all these kids out there with these pens, markers like Sharpies and things, and they all crowded around me, and it's all over my shoes and my new pants and everything. And so I said, look, kids, just line up, and I'll stay here until I sign. I'll sign everybody's. And from that time on, every Sunday when I came out of Dodger Stadium, that we played on Sunday at Dodger Stadium, those kids were lined up, half a block long, according to height. And I'll always remember, I heard a little kid say, you don't have to push. He'll stay here until he signs everybody's. and that chokes me up right now just to mention.
Oh,
that.
wow. What a tribute to you.
Yeah, those are the kind of things. So I was always that kind of a person. So, and I don't know why I became addicted. I don't think an addiction is something that we seek to do. I don't know if anybody said I can hardly wait until I'm 20 years old so I can become an addict. I've never heard that. I do believe that it's something that just happens to us. We're in the wrong place, a certain place at a certain time around certain people. And when I speak in schools and places or in front of adults, I mention, and I'm not ashamed of my disease and my being in recovery. Not at all. I'm not ashamed at all. In fact, I feel good about the fact that I've done something about it. But I encourage parents to know where their children are, know who their friends are, and know what they're doing and where and whatever. Don't just take it for granted. And even if you have to snoop, if you suspect anything, do it. Because there's usually somebody else who had the influence that makes a kid go the wrong direction or make bad choices. And that's where it was with me. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, feeling bad about being fired, feeling I was on the pity part about they fired me and so forth and so on. And anything that would make me feel better, I was all for it.
Pour me a drink.
Yeah, pour me a drink.
Maury Will's nice enough to spend a little bit of time with us tonight. He is not only a Dodger legend, he is an amazing man. He's a miracle. 17 years in recovery, went to the very bottom, and he's living proof that there is no such thing as a hopeless addict. Do not ever give up on somebody that you know who has addiction, because they can come back, they can realize the miracle, and they do it one day at a time. My co-host tonight is Brian Abker. Brian?
Maury, anybody who excels at their craft or their profession, even if it's a God-given talent that they have, they still have to work hard on it every single day to be as good as they are. And I'm sure you did in your sport. How does that compare to having to work hard on your addiction every single day?
Oh, it's the same. I know exactly what you mean. I've always had a good work ethic, even when I was a kid, because I came from a family of 13, born and raised in the projects. And at a young age, I learned to do what I needed to do to make a few nickels. You know, we got paid in nickels and dimes and pennies, you know, and that was a lot of money. So I guess that kind of followed me into my adult life. And then when I became I signed as a professional player when I was 17, and I started at 18. I don't know, maybe, you know, I'm a little guy, and I knew, and these ball players all around me, everybody was bigger than I, and I always knew I had to work hard, and I had to be a little bit smarter about how I went about my playing. So I never tried to do something I couldn't do. like hit the home run or whatever. So I learned the butt, steal bases, and just hit ground balls and line drives. Now, when I got into my work in my program of recovery, I got a real hard-nosed sponsor. His name is Frank C. Frank C., as I said, is 89 years old, about 40 years on the program, and
wow.
Still calls me boy, from the old school, and that was just what I needed. Frank said, Maury, the three-way sponsors can go. I can be hard and brittle and yelling at you, but you got to do this and got to do that, and I don't want to do that because maybe I'll chase you off. And he said, I can be soft and mushy. Come on, Maury, you got to do this, or, it's this. He said, that's not going to work. He said, but I'm going to be right down the middle, firm and solid. When we say we're going to do something, we're going to do it, and so forth and so on. And so from that, even though I didn't have that work ethic that I grew up with and that I had as a professional player now, because I'm an addict, an alcoholic, and I don't want to do anything. Like they had Dodgers, they had Old Timers Day games at Dodger Stadium, and they would call me and say, Maury, we'd like for you to show up this year. I'm locked up in the house, and he said, Sandy's going to be there, and Don's going to be there, meaning Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale, and Duke's going to be there, and so forth. I said, okay, really, yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'll be there. So, as you know, it was on a Sunday morning. They want me there at 11 o'clock, and so that Saturday night I said, I better get some rest, and I'm trying to sleep, and I can't go to sleep. I haven't had to sleep in 2 or 3 days, and my body's saturated with alcohol and drugs, and so anyway, I said, well, maybe if I could just have 1 or 2, and that'll put me to sleep. You know what that means. Now, the next morning at 10 o'clock when I should be leaving for Dodger Stadium, I'm in full flight, bouncing off the walls, full flight from reality. And one more time, when you get to the very end of introducing about 50 players, it's Maury Wills, then there's Don Drysdale, and Sandy Koufax would be the last person. And one more time, that spot, third from the end, Maury Wills' spot, is empty. I couldn't make it. So, I just couldn't do anything. My disease just drained me of any kind of initiative. So, but then when I surrendered in that place in Newport Beach, and I told you I did a geographic, when I got back, I called Frank. I said, Frank, I'm back, Frank. He said, good. He said, now we can go to work. I said, work? He said, yeah. We got to get down to causes and conditions. And he said, I want you to call me every morning at 9 o'clock. And if I was 2 minutes late, he'd hang the phone up on me. I could hear the phone falling all over the floor and everything. So I called him back, Frank, what's the matter? I told you to call me at 9. And he'd hang up again. So it took me 3 weeks before I could call him at 9 o'clock. And my meeting is over it starts at 6:45 and it's over at 7:45. So I got an hour and 15 minutes sitting around waiting to call Frank, and I wasn't even responsible enough to do it. And it took me 3 weeks, but I finally got it. And then it was in the winter time because I got sober in August. So in the winter time, I'm feeling good. I got 30 days, 60 days, and I don't think I'm hot stuff. And I called Frank about 4 o'clock, just before dark, and I was on the way home. I said, Frank, I'm going to call you when I get home. I even got a cell phone now. I'm big time. And so I'll call you when I get home, Frank. He said, okay, Maury. And so the next morning, I called him at 9 o'clock, right on the nose. And Frank said, where you been, Maury? Even today when he said, where you been, Maury? I know something I didn't do right. I said, what do you mean where I've been, Frank? I went to my meeting, and it's 9 o'clock, right on the nose, and I'm calling you just like you said you. He said, Maury, you told me you were going to call me last night when you got home. I paused, and gee, I said, oh, Frank, what's the big deal, man? I call you every morning on time. He said, Maury, you don't have to make those useless promises or those unnecessary commitments. I didn't ask you to call me, and you said you were going to call me. So if you're going to say you're going to do something, do it today. Now, that's been a number of years ago. And today, when I made a commitment to be on your show, and it's at 10 o'clock, and to call about 10 to 10 to get set up, I mean, I had no, I'm usually in bed now. I go to bed early, but I stayed up because I wanted to be responsible, and then I learned all that from Frank. So I had to re-educate my entire way of thinking and acting and everything else. I've had that, what we call a psychic change. It's a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery. I cease fighting everyone and everything, and today I have no no ill feelings, no resentments against any person, place, or thing.
How did it go for you making amends, Maury?
Oh, well, I learned that it was no big deal. A lot of people didn't even remember, or they said, hey, okay, great. The amends I learned from Frank, that the amends are for me and not for the person that I'm making the amends to.
Absolutely.
For me. So I got through that. It wasn't a big deal. Like a person like myself going into it would think. A new person thinking is tough to do. And once you get into it and you get the mood, you get in the right frame of mind, you get a higher power, God of your own understanding, who has all power and all knowledge, and you can tap into that, which I have done. I'm a God-conscious person today. You know, my father was a Baptist minister, and I went to church all the time, and I always believed in God and that there's a God, but I never had a relationship with a higher power the way I have today. And if anybody who might be listening has any question, I'm here as a witness to say that there is a divine power in the universe that can do things for us that we could never do for ourselves. I was just a low bottom alcoholic and drug addict of the hopeless variety, and how I ever got sober. And I'm standing here in the living room of my beautiful home, which has taken me 17 years to recover and get it back, get my economics and everything back. And if I can do that, and I remember the day when the marshals came and put me right out of my big beautiful home with my disease, when I was going into my disease, and I was homeless. Now I could never have done this, but it was without some kind of power being my source of direction. So I know that for a fact. I know it. I mean, I'm not saying I speak to a voice. I speak to God. And it's inside of me. It's a feeling inside of me, and I believe that God works through people. Just right now, this is a God-based interview and moment that we're spending together.
Absolutely. Maury, we don't have too much time left, but a couple of other emails I do want to get to. One is somewhat pertinent today. It's Wally wrote in from Chicago. What are your thoughts about the epidemic of steroids today in Major League Baseball?
You know, I've learned through my recovery to just kind of mind my own business, and I've finally grown up, and I try not to interfere with these guys today, what they do, but I think the worst part of it all is bad totally, but the worst part is the influence that it has had on the young generation.
Absolutely.
It's in schools now and stuff like that. They want to emulate the big leaguers. It's bad. It's bad.
Andy in Philadelphia wants to know, have other players in Major League Baseball sought you out because of your visibility as a recovering addict?
I tell you the truth, I've noticed that there have been times when players have avoided me in a way that I suspected that, but maybe, because if you just don't want somebody around who's sober if you're dabbling.
Yeah, it takes one to know one,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are some young players in the Dodge organization that I'm in spring training. We're all there together. That I might see his behavior, and I might see him drinking or smell some alcohol on him, and I'll just ease up to him and check him out and talk to him a little bit. And he knows that I'm in recovery, and he respects that, and he listens to me. I don't know how much good it does, but at least I try to plant the seed.
In the minute or so that we have left, Maury, what do you say to somebody out there who is struggling, who was or is where you were, down at that bottom of a pit?
Yeah. Well, what I say is that there is a solution. It's the way out. And if anybody is in that spot who might be listening, you don't have to follow through with it. You don't have to go all the way to the bitter end. You can turn it around. I know that for a fact. But the key to it is willingness. You got to be willing, and if you're willing, there are tons of people. You can look in the telephone directory
Plenty of resources in this day and age, Maury, right?
Absolutely. But you just have to be willing, if anybody's listening and might be in that position. And I hope you do seek some help, because I'm here as a witness that we can all turn it around and be.
You are living proof, Maury, that you do not have to die for a drink or a drug.
Yes.
I thank you so much for your time, Maury. It has been a real pleasure. I wish you all the best, my friend. You are one of the winners.
Thank you, Neil. And Brian's going to be on with you more?
He certainly is.
I'm going to start tuning you in then.
Okay.
All right, Maury.
All right, you're the
Thank
man,
you.
Maury. Thank you so much.
Wow, what a life. What a career. And what devastation, personal bankruptcy caused by alcohol and other drugs. He went to the absolute bottom, and he rose back to the absolute top. He told me privately that he believed that he spent at least $1 million in 1 year on cocaine. Got pretty bad, but it also got pretty good. His recovery is exemplary. He's survived by his wife Carla and 6 children. I hope you've enjoyed this special edition of the podcast, which was put together rather quickly following the sad news of Maury's passing in Sedona, Arizona this week. By the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast, if you would like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path that you've chosen, as long as you've been in continuous recovery for a year or more, drop us a note at recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. In just 30 seconds, we're going to hear from legendary actor Dick Van Dyke, whose words of wisdom were lived by Maury Wills. Stay with us.
She has always been your baby, but when your daughter got into drugs and alcohol, she turned into a stranger. What do you do? Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown's nationally recognized youth treatment program guides young people back to a life free of drugs and alcohol. All treatment is gender-specific and directed by caring certified professionals in a safe environment. You can get your daughter back and get to know her again. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
And now a thought for the day from an iconic actor who is in long-term recovery, award-winning actor Dick Van Dyke, on surrendering to win, which is what Maury Wills on this special edition of Recovery Coast to Coast did. Exactly. Surrendering to win.
With one man, resignation stores up treasures in heaven. With another man, it does but store explosives in the heart. Francis Herbert Bradley. All through our lives, and especially when we're young, we're taught that winning is what matters most. Winning isn't everything, sports heroes tell us with a wink. It's the only thing. We grew up believing that to become winners, we must put our noses to the grindstone and our shoulders to the wheel. We learn to try, and try again, until, like the little locomotive puffing its way up the grade, we have psyched ourselves into that all-important winning frame of mind. So it's hardly surprising that for most people, the very idea of surrender is unthinkable. As for surrendering to win, that's not only unthinkable, it's impossible. But the paradox of strength in surrender is true. By giving up our old selves, we become new, stronger individuals. In cities and nations across the world, more and more of us are learning to think the unthinkable and thereby achieve the impossible. We are surrendering to win, and in doing so are allowing God to do for us what we could not and still cannot do for ourselves. We are being released from the bondage of self. We're being relieved of our obsessions and addictions. We are being guided into new realms of freedom and serenity. Thought for today: surrender to win.
Well, that wraps up this edition, the special edition of the National Podcast Recovery Coast to Coast, as we look back on the life and the legacy and the long-term recovery of a baseball legend, Maury Wills. Now, if you've enjoyed this special edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, our email is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Also, please hit the subscribe or follow button. That's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. We encourage you to share this podcast and all of our podcasts on social media. And remember, if you know someone who's experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here's the 24-hour national helpline. It offers free information and confidential treatment referrals. Spanish-speaking individuals available as well. It's 1-800-622-HELP. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery. Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. Another quick shout out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, successfully treating individuals, including adolescents and their families, for well over 50 years. Sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.